you. Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Again, thank you for the delayed starting time. We have one of our members is having a fantastic family day. Congratulations to you and your family. And the one tuition payment is done now?
Only two to go.
No, thank you again, everybody. That's very nice. Item number 2, routine applications. Mr. Drake.
We have 3 items which are routine, and I'll name them one by one, and I propose to make them non-routine.
Okay.
So the first one is HD7 from the Health Department, a $3,500 item, which is an approval to use funds to enhance the Greenwich Medical Reserve Corps. Shall I name them all?
Name them all. It'll be under the same motion to move them from routine to non-routine.
The second one is HD8 from the Health Department, a $4,000 item, approval to use Medical Reserve Corps program enhancement. And the third one is PD6, for which we don't have a number and a dollar amount, which is acceptance of a support from Shelter Our Strays, which is an appropriation to be financed by a gift. It's $25,000, isn't that right?
Okay.
I think that's right.
So I have our routine applications moved. I need a second, and I'd also like to have a discussion on moving them into non-routine.
I'll second that.
Seconded. And we have a motion to move these out of, the reason for moving them out of routine into non-routine is then we would follow our normal procedure of committee reports, et cetera. Anybody have an issue with that? Because otherwise we normally dispense with committee reports. All those in favor of making all of the items in the routine applications non-routine signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining. Okay, HD7 now comes before us, and I will call on Mr. Johnson, Budget Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. HD7, Health Department requesting $3,500 approval to use funds to enhance the Greenwich Medical Reserve Corps. Attending our committee meeting was Caroline Baisley and Debbie Flynn from the Health Department. Basically, this is a grant from the National Association of County and City Officials, also known as NACHO, to be administered by the Greenwich Health Department. Basically, this is money to be used for salaries and different expenses within the Health Department to administer this. The Medical Reserve Corps, we learned from this discussion, was basically formed about 2 or 3 years ago. We have about 150 volunteers within the town. Many of those volunteers are medical, or people with medical backgrounds, medical professionals. And again, this is for part-time salaries, advertising, postage, and other office supplies. We first considered this to be a routine application, but the committee did have a number of questions on the liability for the town of Greenwich for those who volunteer to treat those people in need during emergencies, such as large storms. We have had a number of emails back and forth over the last few days with comments from Ron Lally, our risk manager, as well as our finance department weighing in, as well as Ms. Baisley from the health department. And there was really basically questions on the liability. Who's at risk and what type of liability should we have? A member of our committee did recommend as subject to release, with the first subject to release being upon review and recommendations by the town risk manager and by the town law department. The second release would be upon receipt of health department guidelines that govern activities by the Medical Reserve Corps and other certified volunteers. We thought that the guidelines would be important to better understand who can administer help and who can't. So basically, we thought it'd be important to have these subject releases perhaps reviewed by the Budget Committee next month with a report to the BET to our satisfaction and recommendations.
Further discussion? Do we have the language from the subject releases? I saw them in the emails, but
Yeah.
I have them in the email I sent if you need me to recite it.
Yeah.
I would think that would be a good idea.
Yeah.
If you wouldn't, Mr. Karen?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Raymond.
Procedurally, if Mrs. Kiernan would make
The-
her proposal as a motion?
Of course, yes. I didn't know if we had them or not, so that's why.
No, I defer to Ms. Kiernan.
So I'd like to move that we condition HD7 and HD8, subject to release on number 1, insurance review and recommendations by town risk manager and the town law department, and number 2, presentation of health department guidelines that govern activities of MRC and CERT volunteers.
I would second that.
Discussion on the motion.
Does Carolyn have?
Yeah, I'll get to it.
And Dan,
Ms. Baisley, welcome. Good evening. Good to see you out there. So I think what you're seeing is the committee's in favor of the item, and there's just a couple subject to releases that they wanted to have some feedback on for next month's meeting, and if you wanted to comment on that, or if that's fine, or... I see Mr. Warzo is here. Welcome, welcome, everyone.
Yes, Dan is our emergency management director for the town, and actually he plays a major role in the MRC because I need to ask him as the coordinator to actually initiate the MRC into play when there is an emergency. And then we need to get approval from the state because this is all approved by the state. I think I sent some copies of some documents where it was the oath, the annual oath that needs to be done, and Dan gives the oath to those, and I manage the program, so I make sure whoever takes the oath are doctors and nurses, or whether medical or non-medical. I don't think the non-medical is the people that have in the MRC is really an issue for you all. I think it's the medical people that are the issue because of the way the town's insurance is written, and they don't cover medical personnel. So, but we believe that the state, there's enough information that I have tonight that would perhaps sway your decision-making, that the state of Connecticut, the federal government, does protect these folks when they are called to an emergency, as long as they're volunteers. And many of all the MRCs, I think, are throughout the state and country are under municipalities, usually either under the EMD, but usually under the health director or a health department person who actually makes sure that, they're all doctors, they're all nurses, they all have their, they're all licensed. Of course, it's the same requirements I have for my own staff. My own nurses, obviously, they can't administer any vaccinations or, dispense any medication without the proper licensing. So they fall into the same category. So they're allowed to work in a disaster situation as long as they're not getting compensated as MRC people. And then as long as they're working within their own practice, the doctor working in his practice, nurse working in hers, if there's no I would say
Negligence.
gross misconduct. In other words, if there was an accident, as I think Sarima raised, that somebody gives them an overdose, as long as it's not intentional, that we would not, they would be covered by the state and the federal government. So they cover the liability of the professional for their duties, because let's face it, that's the reason why they wrote the regulations. There's no town or city or state that really has coverage for them in a situation like that. So that's why the federal regulations cover them, because otherwise we wouldn't be able to have MRCs, and we wouldn't be able to have people stepping up to the plate helping people. In fact, I also use the same people that in the event that there's, a pandemic that we had in 2009. Where do you think I get all the nurses and doctors to immunize the entire town? I did over 6,000 people in 2009. I didn't use my 5 nurses, I can tell you that. I used volunteer nurses and doctors, not only coming from Nathaniel Woodrow, but from other organizations, so doctors' offices, retired people who are allowed to still immunize as long as they hold a license. So in the time of disaster, we definitely need. There's not enough to go around. And by the way, during Storm Sandy, the hospital was full to the brim. There was no coming in or out. So we had to take in people at both shelters. whether they were ill or not ill. We didn't have a choice. So that's pretty significant. It's the first time we ever, and Dan will tell you, the first time ever in the town's history did we run into a real disaster. And I think this is going to be more than a norm. It really tested our ability to handle the problem.
If I could just enlighten the board a little bit. The things that Ms. Kiernan asked for are spelled out not in local documents, but in federal and state documents pre-existing before a CERT team or an MRC is developed. These are the rules of the road that are set forth by the federal government and by the states, and particularly the state of Connecticut has some very robust guidelines for operations of both CERTs and MRCs. And the mission sets for each may be different for different communities. Again, on the federal side, you have to understand that we are in New England and there's no county government. The rest of the United States works off a county government set, so the language is somewhat different, and you may not think it would apply here, but in fact it does. So back in 2010, Commissioner Peter Boynton of the Department of Emergency Management and Homeland Security set out regulations on MRCs. The CERT regulations were tightened up, and I can speak specifically to the CERT mission in Greenwich, which is fairly simple. It's one, to support the Emergency Operations Center with call takers, runners, relief people. Two, to assist Caroline's people in the MRC in shelter management and shelter operations. Three, to assist in the animal sheltering operation up at North Street, and to assist at the animal sheltering operation over at the Eastern Middle School. So we've got a very tight mission right now. That mission may change for our 54 CERT volunteers, and I'm sure as we go to our next session of CERT, it was such a success, we're probably going to see more Greenwich residents involved in that. But again, all these folks are activated either for training. They're covered under Title 28, which is a Connecticut General State statute, which provides them liability coverage, indemnifies their actions, and I believe you should have received something from Ron Lally today about governance of volunteer usage and what they're protected for during routine operations. And that mirrors what goes on at the state level. And again, the workers' comp point is we activate them. They're covered by the state of Connecticut, not by the town of Greenwich.
Right. And I think there was an issue of who they take direction from. Well, of course, on site they take direction from myself, and at a higher level they take direction from Dan, because he's the EMD for the town, and he actually activates the MRC as per the state requirements. So they're not working, under the requirements, the oversight of the state. It's me that they're working. I mean, I'm the one that makes sure that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. A lot of times, other than me using them in a pandemic or in another kind of disaster, say you were all exposed to anthrax and I needed to actually do immunizations there. But in the sheltering, they don't really administer any, medication. Most of the people that are coming in, they have their own little bag of stuff, and they're, and then if anything happens, I mean, they're sustaining their life while we call 911. Now, Storm Sandy was a little different because all roads leading to the Western Greenwich Civic was closed. So we were by ourselves. There was no way to get to us unless you had a helicopter. So for a while there, for at least 8 hours, 7 hours, we were kind of isolated. And the only thing we had was myself, and the people who were there were about 60, 80, 100 people, and a couple of MRC people, which some of them thankfully were doctors and nurses. So we were lucky to have them on board in the event of emergency, because we weren't getting any ambulances over there, I can tell you that. But routine 911, on the most part, they would use. I mean, they wouldn't do, they wouldn't open you up, anything like that. And they wouldn't administer, because we don't carry medication in a situation like that. In the event that I have to distribute vaccinations or distribute countermeasures from the federal government, I have to have a doctor's order, which we do. Dr. Oturi is the doctor of record for the Department of Health. He issues the order on which we all work under. And he supervises the administration of the medication. So, but that, again, that's on a grand scale, and I only had to use that once.
You should also be aware that that particular item was just practiced recently throughout the state of Connecticut, the use of mass prophylaxis delivery of meds to each of the communities. It was an under-the-radar kind of an event that the Department of Health ran statewide. Greenwich was a big participant in that event. And so, I mean, we are doing, this is a routine kind of thing that we do all the time, prepare to be able to do this stuff. So it's not an on-the-fly kind of an event.
Mr. Raymer, I think?
I seconded the motion of Mrs. Kiernan to impose those conditions. It doesn't really matter what particularly my point of view is. It's the fact that the board really needs to have some advice from the town attorney's office. The concern that I had, which prompts me to second, was that the language that you had sent to us says that the volunteer has an insulation from liability. It provides an immunity from, reading now, immunity from tort liability for claims of loss caused by, arising out of, or resulting from the administration or use of a countermeasure to a disease, etc. So if I had, and the reason I picked the hypotheticals that I did that you apparently had seen in the email traffic, I picked some hypotheticals where a well-intended, quite competent volunteer could make inadvertently a mistake in the handling of somebody who comes into a shelter, so that that volunteer either causes that person to take a double dose of a heart medication or not to take his heart medication, or an overdose of an insulin or not to take his insulin. None of those acts have anything to do with the implementation of the countermeasures. And so none of this insulation from liability have any application to that. That's just simply a negligent event, which unfortunately happens despite the competence of the person, but in the haste and flurry of the moment, the intensity of all the confusion that's going on, a human mistake is made and somebody is injured and a claim is made against the town. To my perception, I thought that Mrs. Kiernan's concern to, gee, let's check to see if we have insurance on that was well-founded. And then the corollary to that is, to determine what is insured, maybe there needs to be clarity, a protocol prepared by you, Carolyn, as to what will these people be doing, so that you put together the protocol and we'll show that to the insurance agent. And the insurance agent will either say you are insured or you're not. If you're not, we can ask the question, okay, what would it cost us to get insurance? And then we can make a financial decision based upon that.
I don't think your insurance will cover, I think exempts actually doctors and nurses working under that kind of scenario.
Well, I don't know, actually, Ken, I don't want to have a debate with you on this. My point only is that there's enough here that it seems to me we better ask the town attorney to give us some legal advice. We better ask the risk manager to give us some advice. We better ask our very capable chair of the Department of Health to give us some clarity as to what they're doing, so the advices we're getting from our risk manager and our town attorney are based on something concrete, and then we'll know. And the answer may easily be, you got no problem, you're insured. In which event, I'm sorry that I wasted everybody's time, but at least I knew that we were insured.
I mean, the countermeasures are clearly very well managed. I mean, the countermeasure, we would most likely not in a shelter. A shelter operation would not warrant the concern. It would be, a mass distribution of any kind of countermeasure in case if there was an outbreak or if there is a pandemic. And that comes with very strict oversight from the Department of Health, because mostly of the time the countermeasure is coming from the federal government, and it comes in prepackaged, push-pack, if it's a medication, if it's a pill, and if it comes as a vaccination, it is all prepared and oversight by the Department of Health. That probably wouldn't happen. I mean, I'm not going to say that it's not wild. It is wild when we had to do 6,000 people, but it was very well organized and it was very well run, and we give them what has to be injected. I mean, you always have a doctor or a nurse and a person at site that actually prepares the medication for dispensing. But I can leave this stuff too, because I think that the information I gave you was not, I have the whole 28, Title 28, that I can give to, if if you would like to read it, because you're...
If you give it to the chair, we'll pass it along to the town attorney's office. Is that appropriate, Mr. Chairman?
Certainly.
Okay.
Just have a question to the chair. The condition to release on this, these funds are now, that the checks are in hand of the town of Greenwich. This is obviously going to take some time, and we're going to pass into another fiscal year. Would Caroline be able to come back and get those funds back if we're back before you?
One check I'm going
This-
to lose. One check I'm going to lose because that's an HO check. That has to be spent by June 30th. The other funds of money, the $4,000, I have a little leeway. That comes from the region of the state of Connecticut, but from the HO, that has to go back. And we do have a training on June 12th.
Well, our next,
The HO, I have no, it came late, and I have no other, I mean, by the time you give it to me, I...
The BET meets on the 16th of June.
yeah, and our
Yeah,
budget
I
committee
can't
meets on June
I can't
3rd.
spend it in 2
Our
weeks.
budget committee meets on June 3rd, where we can review this, review the conditions. And then, as you said the 16th? So hopefully we
Well,
can
one
get
of
this
them,
cleared up.
but I have to send back the other check, because I can't spend it
I thought you said by by June
sorry?
30th. When did you say you had to spend it by?
June 30th.
Okay, well, hopefully there'll be time.
I won't have time. I
Only have
can't
2 weeks
spend it
left.
in 2 weeks. So one of those checks has to go back. The other check, I can wait for
The
your
other one's a
decision.
regional grant check.
What is the check?
It's regional.
Why can't the
And
check,
got till October for that one.
why
Yeah,
can't the check
so
be
I can-
spent be cashed in the last part of June? What am I missing?
Oh, no, I have to show that it's spent. It's not just cashing it. It's already in the town's forfeitures right as we speak. We're just waiting for a designated account.
But I think what they're saying is the Budget Committee meets on June 3rd. Your program's June 12th. If the Budget Committee, assuming the
Okay.
BET gives the Budget Committee the authority to review that
And I'm
condition, if
pretty
they're
sure-
satisfied, then you can just
16th.
release it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So-
That was the full BET,
Oh, I
not the
see.
16th. The Budget Committee meets on the 3rd.
So,
Then we have a shot at it.
so then here we go.
We have a shot at it.
So the way that would work is
I can
if,
spend
if this body,
$3,500, don't worry.
if this body delegated the release of those conditions to the Budget Committee, then it would be June 3rd. I'm not sure if I heard that in Ms. Kiernan's motion or not.
I'll make that motion right after we pass on the amendment proposed by Mrs. Kieran.
Okay, so let's, Ms. Tarkington had her hand up.
Going to suggest something similar to what
Okay.
Mr.
So-
Prater suggested.
Ms. Kiernan?
Mr. Minarski, you mentioned that Ron Lally was going to be reviewing this. Is there anything preliminarily you wanted to share, or what his process is going to be in the short term?
It's my understanding that the review was done at the risk management level. He's determined that the professionals are not covered under the liability policy, as stated by Dan and Caroline, and the volunteers are covered by the liability policy. He, at this point, is not going to do anything further, unless you have anything specific answer beyond that.
So help me make sure we understand. So the activities of medical volunteers in the scenarios that have been discussed here are not covered.
Not covered by the town, covered by the state of Connecticut.
Okay. And you mentioned that we have $1 million umbrella liability nonetheless?
No, we have self-insured retention, otherwise
Self-insured
known as the
retention.
deductible, up to $1 million for the non-professionals.
Okay.
But to follow up, if the condition remains in, you can keep the risk management piece in, and Ron Lally will work with the law department as far as getting an opinion from them. Is that okay?
Yeah, that'd be helpful.
Okay, so the motion right now is to add a subject to release by Mr. Kiernan on HD 7 and 8. So further discussion. All those in favor of the motion to add the subject to release signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Yes.
Okay, so that is 11-1-0. Okay,
Now, was that for both HD7 and HD?
yeah, the condition was, the motion was for both. I will now recognize Mr. Raymer for a motion to,
Yeah, if it pleases the chair, maybe the appropriate way to address this then would be to take a vote on the item as amended, And then, once that vote has been taken, I'll then offer a motion to delegate the authority to approve the release of the conditions, making the delegation from the BET to the Budget Committee. But it seems logical that you would pass on the motion first, and then we'll worry about who has the authority to release it.
We could do it that way, either way, it doesn't matter. Okay, HD 7, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Yes.
Abstaining? 11-1-0. HD 8, health approval to use, 4,000. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Yes.
Abstaining? 11-1-0. Okay,
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Raymer,
I would make the following motion. I would move that the Board of Estimate and Taxation delegate to its Budget Committee the authority to review and, if appropriate, release the conditions that have just been proposed upon the funding in HD 7 and HD 8.
I have a
I
motion.
second
I have a motion to delegate, seconded by Mr. Raymer, seconded by Ms. Tarkington. Discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Yes.
Abstaining? 11-1-0. Thank you. So I guess what you need, if my suggestion is to have everything ready to go for that Budget Committee meeting on, which is only 2 weeks. 2 weeks, it's not that far away.
I do my best.
Okay, okay.
No control over the law department, but I do my best. Thank you.
If you need help with that, obviously, we don't want to see these forfeit these funds, so obviously we can try to help. Moves us to the next item that has been moved and seconded for committee report. I will call on, from the Budget Committee, Mr. Johnson.
Mr. Chairman, PD 6, is that what we're?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Is from the Police Department for $25,000. It's basically acceptance to spend $25,000. This is a financial support from Shelter Our Strays organization to construct outdoor dog run at the animal control facility in North Street. This facility will be built to the specifications of the Connecticut Department of Agriculture and within the P&Z guidelines, approved guidelines. And the construction will be supervised by our Building, Construction, and Maintenance Division. So basically, Shelter Our Strays will reimburse the town for the expenses up to $25,000 for building this dog run, which is needed in that facility. Committee voted 4-0-0 to approve this.
Okay, item's been moved by the Budget Committee, seconded by Ms. Tarkington. Discussion? Mr. Raymer?
It's worth noting there's actually sort of two pieces to this. We're approving, it appears to me, the acceptance of a gift of up to $25,000 from the Shelter Our Strays organization. We're also approving the project. Although it appears, although we haven't heard from Mr. Minnelli directly, it does appear that he's estimated the cost of this at somewhat under $25,000. We're approving the project at this point. I guess we're approving the project at up to $25,000. In the event the project costs more than $25,000, Shelter Our Strays isn't undertaking to pay the excess. I take it that Mr. Minnelli or somebody would have to come back to us at that point for the additional funds.
I would consider that accurate.
Okay. But it's at that point, it's kind of a situation in which you sort of punch the tar baby. I think you're probably in the project. I'm not necessarily saying that I think this project will come in at more than $25,000. I just wanted everybody to understand, and I'm going to vote in favor of this, but I just wanted everybody to understand that you're doing two things here. One is you're agreeing to accept the gift. Why wouldn't you? And then secondly, you're also approving the project, which has this outside possibility of some overrun. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Raymer. Mr. Menarski, that gift has to go to the RTM, that $25,000 gift.
Yes, it's my understanding Greg Hannigan is getting it to the both the RTM. Question is, in my 10 years here, I don't believe it's been a BET policy to accept gifts.
It is not. It's not our authority. That's why, but we need to make the appropriation on this.
And that's, the reason it's here, it's sort of an unusual item. in that they're not giving us $25,000 to build the facility.
Reimbursement.
They are going to pay the contractors.
Okay.
And that's where it gets a little bit tricky.
Okay, so then we're really, then this is not an appropriation then. Then it is just a gift. It still has to go to the RTM.
No, it definitely has to go to the RTM because it's a gift.
Right.
But my question was going to be is do we need to clean up our gift policy? I remember about 5 or 6 years ago, the BET was hesitant, did not want the town to accept gifts if we're going to incur a future cost. Not that I'm saying this is happening here.
No, I understand.
But do we, maybe, my question to the full BET through the chairman is, do we need to clean up our gift policy?
Correct. In the past, we had gifts that the town received that there were ongoing expenses or replacement cost of something we put into service, a piece of equipment or something like that, and there were questions asked about that. So in this particular case, I think what we're saying, even though we don't approve gifts, is I think we're looking at this as, in general, this is in addition to an ongoing capital project we have right now, the dog facility. So I think our approval doesn't hurt anything. We're just, and I think Mr. Ramer's point is well taken. If this goes beyond that $25,000 and it's not completed, then, Mr. Manelli's going to have to step in, which means he'll be looking at us for some help. Ms. Tarkington?
Yeah, I guess this now begins to get a bit more complicated because, they're building on town property, and so the questions now become the insurance for this project, the bonding for this project. It's approximately $25,000 if municipal improvement is needed. I mean, now, as it's described, it's not going to be appropriated. Then I worry, or would like to be assured that all the insurance and bonding, et cetera, is in proper order, and all of this is acceptable to the town, et cetera, et cetera. Now, it did say in the cover here that the project will be supervised by the Building, Construction, and Maintenance Division, and is estimated to cost approximately $25,000. But this is beginning to make it a bit more gray, perhaps, than as it's now being described by Mr. Minarski, than perhaps I thought it was. I think we have something to think here about in order to make sure we're properly protected on this construction project.
You mentioned bonding. There is no bonding. Why would there be bonding?
Because it's a municipal project.
Yeah.
It has to have a performance bond.
And it needs to comply with the regulations that we have on our property.
Right.
So, that's, I just want to make sure that we're not now beginning to find ways to get around what should be town processes and create liabilities for the town. I supported the project and supported it in the Budget Committee, but I think now there are some gray areas that we need to make sure we've addressed.
Mr. Raymer.
No, it gets too cute by half. If somebody would have had to get approval for a gift to give us $25,000 to build a dog run, it doesn't become something different just by saying that someone will pay the contractor directly, but the improvement is going to take place on town land and is going to be a town property when it's done, not owned by SOS, and is going to be supervised by Al Manelli's department. In substance, it's all the same thing. And I don't think there's anything gray about it. To me, it's completely black and white. This is a gift of up to $25,000 to build a dog run on town property supervised by the town. I think we need to treat it, whether or not checks get written by SOS directly to a contractor. I was going to pick one's name, but I thought I shouldn't do that. To the contract, I don't think changes anything. I think we need to treat it as being exactly what it is. It's a gift of $25,000, and it's a roughly $25,000 town project. And whatever the I's that we have to dot and T's that we have to do cross to do that, we need to do those dots and crosses.
I agree with Mr. Raymer on this. I think this happens quite often in town where we hire out things to be done, and you have to follow the purchasing office's guidelines. Okay, with that said, I think from our point of view, since it's not an appropriation, we really do not have to vote on this, but I would really rather it go to the RTM with them knowing that we've done a look at this to see where it is, but.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Raymer?
I'm sorry. If what was before you was a $25,000 gift, and what was before you was approval of a $25,000 construction project, you would be voting on both of those two things. And for precisely that reason, I'm encouraging this board to vote on it as if that's exactly what's happening.
I agree, and because I think from our point of view, for the things mentioned before, does this have ongoing costs? Is it, what is this part of? So it's part of our education, I would say, for us when we're working on our capital projects and our model. Okay, further discussion of PD6.
So,
May I just make sure I understand? Are we going to approve this, but Roland or Pete will write this up as an appropriation in the other side?
No, Ms. Tarkington, there's no appropriation here.
Is that right?
Mr. Drake?
I think the thing was properly presented in our agenda. It's acceptance of support, and I think all you have to do is accept that support, and I think it'd be wise to do so. This is a favorable and positive gift of a worthwhile project, so let's give it a green light. It's not an appropriation nor a gift. It's neither.
Mr. Raymer had just described this as an appropriation, and
Not. Ask the gentleman. It's not.
Ms. Tarkington, this is not an appropriation, and the RTM accepts gifts. Mr. Finger.
We often have departments come before us asking for an approval to accept a grant to then spend it for something. And actually, the police department does that quite frequently. Isn't this somewhat akin to that, therefore requiring us to vote for it as an appropriation?
If we were receiving cash and it needed an appropriation, 100% correct. In this particular case, what we're really receiving is a hard gift. We're receiving a hard gift. We're receiving a completed project.
Not quite. It's sort of a hybrid because the hard gift cannot be put in place without the town's cooperation, because the town is actually going to do the work.
Well, probably an outside contractor will do the work.
Well, supervision.
Yeah.
But the contract's going to be with the town. No?
Okay. Further discussion.
Yeah.
We'll just vote on it anyway.
All those in favor?
No, sorry. I mean, I would.
Mr. Raymer?
I mean, I don't mean to drag it out, but I mean, it's not as if it isn't a gift because somebody is paying an expense on our behalf. When somebody pays an expense on our behalf, it's a gift. And it's a gift in the form of a physical improvement to a piece of real property that we own. I would like to see us, I don't mind from a bookkeeping standpoint how the finance department wants to handle it. That doesn't concern me particularly. But from a standpoint of process, if we're going to be receiving this $25,000 benefit, I would like to see us address it and vote on it exactly as if the cash was going to come into our hands rather than have the checks be written to the vendor. That makes no difference to me. And secondly, if there's a $25,000 project on which money is being spent, it doesn't matter to me that the source of that money was gifted money as opposed to tax revenues. I'd like us to be voting. It's just one simple vote, but I want the conception of the vote to be that we recognize that we're receiving this $25,000 benefit and it's going to be spent on this little town project. And to my mind, I think it ought to be handled in the books of the town exactly in that way, even though no actual dollars will be received by the treasurer and no actual checks will be signed by the treasurer in receipt and payment of these sums.
Mr. Drake.
I'd like to agree with about 90% of what Jeff said. I think it's a smart thing for us to just give those in question the sense that the BET is in favor of this. I agree with Jeff about that. But from an accounting point of view, since the money's not passing through the town's hands, it can't go on the town's books. So as with that caveat, which is about that big. That's right, it's their business.
But I want to see us approve it as if it was received a gift and as if it was a $25,000 appropriation. The fact that dollars don't pass through, I'm going to leave that one up to Rome.
Thank you.
So you're against the acceptance of support
No.
wording?
In favor.
No, you're in favor, but you want to change the wording, acceptance of support as written in this call?
I'm simply going to vote in favor of the item as it appears before us. I was only objecting to the ether that the characterizations here was that it's not a gift, it's not an appropriation. As Nancy Bartnose used to say, it is what it is. And what it is in this case is there's going to be a $25,000 project done on town property, and it's going to be paid for by the generosity of this organization. Whether or not it passes through our treasury or not is irrelevant, but I would like to see us approve it as if we received, under the thesis that it's a gift to us and we're spending it on this project. It's both a gift and a project.
Thesis is being the key word. Okay. Further discussion on that item. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining?
So how are you going to
Wow.
manage this?
So for the minute taker, how do we?
For the minutes, the BET has reviewed the acceptance of the hard gift for the improvements at the animal shelter.
It's getting harder by the minute.
That's what the BET just did.
And forward it to the RTM for their approval.
Okay, moving forward. Assessor's report, item number 3 on our agenda. Hello, Lauren, how are you?
Evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the BET. I'd like to present the assessor's report for May 2014. A couple of updates. As of today was the final day for taxpayers to file tax appeals on our grand list of 2013. I believe we have 16. I will get you the actual account and totals, and we'll put that in our my June report to you. Also, last Thursday, May 15th, was the last day for the senior program filing period. We are in the process of going through all the applications right now. We should have that final number by the end of the week and to you in our June report as well.
You think it's similar?
It is. Compared to what we had budgeted from last year, we had $270,000 for the state. We had roughly $905,000 for the local. We did see a number of new applicants. We also every year lose by either sell or, unfortunately, some of the seniors do pass away. So we do lose some over the course of the year as well.
So budget-wise, it should be similar. Similar. Further questions on the assessor's report? I would like to make a comment. I attended a land use roundtable, and I had help keeping me from getting in too much trouble, and I thank you for that. I thought that was a very interesting meeting, and thank you for being there. I knew I couldn't get in too much trouble with you there. Do I have a motion to accept?
And I'll second that. I would just like to make one more comment. The department has hired a new commercial appraiser who's now on board, and he had worked. Perhaps Lauren would just give a very brief description because of his background.
Yes, we've been very fortunate to hire Tim Jaron, who is an MAI, who's an appraiser here in town. He's been here for at least, I believe, 15, 20 years. And he started a couple weeks ago, and he has done work in the past for the Board of Assessment Appeals as well as for the legal department as a consultant, as an independent third party. And now he took Bill Day's position.
Fantastic.
And then I have a couple other comments. One, Lauren and her department is now working on the RFP for the revow, and that will, takes a while and it's going through the process, and also working on the updating the software that will be used for the revaluation. So it's a very busy department right now.
Thank you. Okay. All those in favor of the motion to accept the assessor's report?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining? Thank you very much. Item number 4, Comptroller's report.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, BET members. Make 2 or 3 quick comments on the controls report. In the risk management area, the latest update on the receipt from FEMA is we got the okay to receive another $1,307,000. This is for repair work specific for Island Beach. To date, we've settled the insurance claim. We've got 1.6 and 1.3 from FEMA will be coming in shortly. The total's 5.4 million. Point I want to make on this is, as I said repeatedly in the past, it took a long time to get it, but these monies are going straight to fund balance, and it will become more important later, not for now, when we start to talk about the mill rate and we talk about the increase in the fund balance from the previous year, meaning June 30th, 13 to 14. This is one of the key reasons, this revenue that's coming in from Hurricane Storm Sandy. But I'll elaborate on that later in the evening. Another point is, at the end of the report, the Human Resources Capital Management System, they wanted, the steering committee and the HR department wanted me to communicate to everyone that the project is on time, meaning it's scheduled to be first week of October checks, October 3rd. And more importantly, it's under budget. There was some talk that they thought it was over budget, but right now it's on time and under budget as we speak today. The next steering committee meeting is June 3rd, and we meet monthly, and as we get closer, we might meet more periodically. The final one is Project Renew. I don't want to steal anything from Art Norton's report, but it was scheduled to complete the Project Renew in the summer, July 25th. As soon as we get the certificate of occupancy, we will communicate, my office will communicate with the state and the McGladrey and Pullen, who you okayed about 2 or 3 meetings ago, and we'll start for the certification of cost, and then we will be getting at least $4.49 million with an update on the $985,000 as far as the amendment. It's a couple of quick points. I'll answer any questions on the controller's report.
Comments to the controller? I am, real quick, item number 1, annual budget process. Did you do anything in that?
Roland.
No, I figured I would ask that. Congratulations to the department, Roland, everybody who helped. I mean, it was just amazing. It's a long process. It's about to begin again. But I really want to say thank you from all of us. And I don't think that paragraph does justice to the amount of time and the energy that Finance Department and you put into the budget process. So I just think before we approve your controller's report, that should be noted.
You're welcome, and congratulations to all of you, especially the Budget Committee. It was a relatively smooth budget process this year. It was evidenced the other night at the RTM. It went through somewhat smoothly. And congratulations to you also. And
Well, thank you.
Roland's here, and I'll communicate to the staff. Thank you.
Roland's sitting over there hiding. He's like, as long as you people listen to me and do what I tell you to do. Okay. All right. I'll have a motion to accept the controller's report. Moved by Mr. Norton, seconded by Ms. Tarkington. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining. I have a motion from Mr. Norton to move the treasurer's report. Item 6. Seconded by Mr. Raymer. Discussion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining. That motion is passed, 12-0-0. Just make a note, I'm sorry. BET standing committees. Human Resources.
Sure. You received in your package a report. However, I want to present a few highlights from that report. At its March, April, and May meetings, the HR committee reviewed and discussed the M&C evaluation plan and recommended compensation for 2014-2015. As you recall, the town substantially changed its evaluation plan for M&C employees a year ago to achieve more focus on job performance as well as greater consistency and objectivity. This new system has been well received by both managers and employees. This past year, goals were identified as part of the evaluation plan, but were not part of the quantitative rating. At our meeting in May, the HR committee voted 4-0 to approve a revised evaluation plan for the upcoming year in which goals will now be part of the rating. At its meetings over the past 3 months, the committee also deliberated over the appropriate increase in the M&C compensation pool for 2014-15. You'll recall that the BET approved a budget that had a placeholder of a 2.5% increase. The HR committee considered the following. First, the information that was presented by HR that you should have received in your package shows a projected increase for 2014 ranging from 2.6% to 3.1% for municipals and corporate entities. Second, an average GWI and step increase for town unions of 2.6% for 2013. And third, a CPI for New York and New Jersey urban consumers of 1.3% for the past year. And by the way, the data released on the CPI this past Thursday showed that that number had increased to 1.6%. The HR committee voted 4-0 to recommend to the full BET an increase of 2.5% in the M&C compensation pool for 2014-15. And finally, the HR committee asked HR for a recommendation of the allocation of this pool into a base increase and a high performance or / bonus increase. HR recommended that it be broken down into a 1.5% base increase and an increment of 0.5% for excellent performance and 1% increase for exceptional performance. The HR committee approved this breakdown 4-0. And at the appropriate time in new business, I'll make a motion for the full BET to accept that recommendation.
I thank you, Professor. And yes, under item number 9, you have that item there. We will get to that. Thank you very, very much. I know the HR committee worked very hard on that. Actually, I will entertain a motion right now, Mr. Raymer, to move item 9, the first item, the approval of the MC compensation changes for fiscal 2014-15, to this time in our agenda while we're on the report.
It's a motion to suspend the rules to take a matter out of order. It's not debatable, requires a 2/3 vote.
So thank you for that motion. Seconded by Mr. Finger. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? That motion is passed. So then, if I could, Ms. Weissler, if you could actually...
The motion would be to approve the recommendation of the HR committee of an increase of 2.5% in the M&C compensation pool for 2014-15.
That motion comes on behalf of the HR committee? Correct?
It does. A 4-0 vote on that.
Okay. Discussion on that item? All those in favor?
No, Jeff.
Mr. Raymer, I'm sorry.
Just an inquiry. Would it be the expectation?
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman. I think we've got a motioning to use a microphone here.
Thank you. Mr. Raymer.
I had a question, and that was, would it be the expectation that in the overall, that the pool, the compensation pool, would be expended fully on these salary increases? And the corollary question is, could there be any expectation that the compensation could exceed the amount of the pool that we budgeted?
It could not exceed the amount. And the question is we have a base increase of 1.5% and a max of 2.5%. And we did ask Mary Pepe about her experience last year when it was broken down 1.5% base and 0.5% increase. 75% of employees received the maximum. However, it was her expectation, again, that this year there would be stratification and probably more likely stratification in those areas where you have more employees, MC employees. But she did not anticipate that everyone will receive the 2.5%. And the criteria, if you look at the criteria, 0.5% is for excellent performance and 1% increment is for exceptional performance. And just as a process to further elaborate, all managers have to submit their recommendations to HR in terms of the increment. So there should be some vetting in terms of the consistency across the ratings.
Further discussion?
Mr. Chairman, I'll just add to that. Ms. Weissler gave an excellent report, and I would just add that Ms. Pepe told us that if, in fact, as Mr. Raymer suggests, there is money potentially left over, it could be that a new hire who comes in during the fiscal year, who probably shouldn't be getting a bonus right away, might at some point in time receive some kind of compensation based on performance. So that we leave up to our very capable HR director to determine, but we should not be over budget on this at all.
Further discussion? All those in favor of the resolution?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining? I'm going to mark that 12-0-0. Thank you, Mr. Raymer. Thank you for your motion. I figured while we were on it, it would be worthwhile. Mr. Norton, you have an audit? Nope.
No, because it's all covered in the controller's report.
Copy that. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, item number 7, BET liaison reports. Nothing there. Special project team, Nathaniel Witherell. Mr. Norton?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I have a couple things to report. The first thing is today the state of Connecticut granted to the town of Greenwich a STEEP grant, which is an acronym for Small Town Economic Assistance Program. They granted $500,000 to help fund the expansion of the Nathaniel Witherell Rehabilitation Center. The existing conditions pose severe accessibility issues for the residents, staff, and visitors as the building was constructed before the ADA law was passed. The renovations will provide for ADA, which is Americans with Disabilities Act, and facility upgrades to provide patients with more comfortable, updated surroundings. And I would propose that when the town of Greenwich receives the $500,000, $500,000 STEEP grant, that the money be allocated to the capital program for Witherell to replace the windows, especially on the tower, which would cost at least $400,000.
So, Mr. Minarski, on that, when that grant comes in, we'll have to make a motion to accept and make an appropriation to add it to the, will that just be a capital project, or will that get added to Project Renew?
Intended to be project.
Through you to Mr. Norton, is the project already appropriated?
No.
The windows?
No.
Okay, then the answer is yes.
Okay. So we'll see that. When do we expect that in? Late fall? Mr. Norton, do we have a time frame on that?
No, it don't. Actually, they granted today to 20-some communities the STEEP grants. I'm not certain when the monies are actually going to be received.
So when it comes, we'll deal. Okay, thank you. Let me see, Mr. Norton. June 6th, they're already planning a barbecue there?
For the construction team.
Wow. And what's this? Isn't that us? You know, I don't understand. And what's this? I am in St. Thomas. This is a town record, Mr. Norton. Your traveling exploits should not be part. Okay, I'll let that go. Okay, thank you.
Get out of here. I got to catch a.
That's for work, though. Okay, continuing on. Mesa Hillside Road, Ms. Tarkington. I believe we have some news today from the state of Connecticut.
That's correct. The town today issued a joint press release with the Board of Education with a Greenwich High School environmental testing update. It addressed progress update and summer 2014 remediation plans. And I'll read sort of the highlights from the beginning, or at least some part of it. The remediation activities will begin summer of 2014. As a result of the extensive testing, analysis, and reporting to the regulatory community, approval has been attained to begin remediation work this summer on the south side of the Greenwich High School grounds. This will allow the town to remediate this area as it continues working with the regulators to obtain approval of the remedial action plan for the remainder of the site. Remediation activities will occur in the area. Well, there are 4 maps attached in the press release, and which are accessible online. Compounds that will be addressed by the cleanup include arsenic, benzopyrene, and pesticides. Work will be completed in accordance with a remediation action plan designed for this portion of the site. Tasks include constructing a staging area for contractor access from Route 1 into the property, removing vegetation in areas where soils will be excavated and replaced, followed by the actual excavation, testing, soil replacement, and restoration activities. Final landscaping and site restoration activities for the area are planned for the summer of 2015. And I'll add that there are detailed paragraphs on project schedule and safety measures, school access, summer sports, contractor pre-qualifications, and other investigations and ongoing monitoring. And again, there will continue to be communications. The DPW did pre-qualify contractors. They put this project out to bid. They have accepted a bid, and they're working on the documentation. They hope to begin this project, at least the preparation, in sometime in the early June. So, and then they plan to be out by the middle of August so that all the fields and everything is available for the students in the fall when they come back for sports in school. And this is, one final thing. It's being coordinated with MISA to make sure that both of them can easily use the site working together. And of course, this summer, there are no summer school or other types of activities like that at Greenwich High School. There will be some use of the fields on the most northern part of the site, but north of the area where, again, both the GHS soils and the MISA activities will occur.
Well, thank you. Here we go. I would say, obviously, Ms. Tarkington's our building committee member on that, but right from the start, I've asked her to maintain Hillside Road because the two of them, are on the same site, so we have constant update and what have you. Thank you very much. Item 9, we've already done the first one. Item number 2, approval of RTM resolution changes. Mr. Raymer, can I call on you for this one?
Why, yes, you can, Mr. Chairman. Can I direct the body's attention to the copy of the resolutions that were distributed to you as part of the package? And I bring to your attention 2 changes which I believe to be not particularly substantial. Nevertheless, they still require your vote. The darkened print on the materials that you have do not pertain just to the RTM changes. That darkened print also picks up the changes that you already approved at the budget meeting of this body. But I bring to your attention the following. At the bottom of page 1, what you're seeing is as paragraph 8, 2 changes occur there. 1, that paragraph by error was not previously separately numbered. It now has a number 8. Secondly, the identity of the state regulatory body was apparently misdenominated by us. We called it the Public Utility Control Department. It's actually apparently correctly denominated as the Connecticut Public Utilities Regulatory Authority, and they have made that change. If I can then direct your attention over to paragraph 48, which appears on page 8. You previously approved this paragraph, but a grammatical change was made. I think they're quite correct in the grammatical change. By moving the place at which the word Friends of Greenwich Point appear, it makes it plain that the purpose of this resolution was to authorize only gifts from the Friends of Greenwich Point, whether it be of plantings or donations of money for the purchase of plantings, whereas the languages that previously appeared before left a little gray whether or not we were authorizing financial donations from others for the purchase of plantings. This change approved by the RTM makes it plain that paragraph 48 authorizes only gifts from the Friends of Greenwich Point. Under subparagraph A, it's a gift of plantings. On the subparagraph B, it's donations of money with which to purchase plantings. So those 2 minor changes have been made, and I would move, if I may, that this body adopt those changes so that the approved regulations by the RTM match the approved regulations of the BET.
Moved by Mr. Raymer, seconded by Ms. Tarkington.
And now, Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to add that both of those changes were discussed and unanimously approved within the RTM's Legislative and Rules Committee, which meeting I attended.
Further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining? 12-0-0. Mr. Drake, mill rates for 2014-15.
Let me set forth turn on my mic. I'd like to move the resolutions. There are 3 of them, and helpfully Peter and Roland gave them to each of us on paper with a staple through it. So they are as in front of you. Do you want me to read them?
I think we should read the general fund and the mill rate number.
Okay.
The sewer maintenance fund and the mill rate, and then the sewer improvement fund and that mill rate.
Okay, great. I'll read the general fund first. Resolved that a tax at the rate of 10.969 mils on the dollar be, and the same is hereby levied and laid upon the assessment list of the town of Greenwich last completed as the tax for said town's general fund for the succeeding fiscal year, to wit, for the fiscal year July 1st, 2014 through June 30th, 2015. I'd like me to read the other 2 at this time?
No, just one.
Okay.
Second paragraph.
Second.
Well, yeah, we'll do the second paragraph and then we'll get it started.
And the second paragraph is resolved that the chairman and clerk of the BET shall forthwith file a certificate of the levying and laying of such tax with the town clerk, who shall record such certificate in the town meeting record book and obtain a receipt from the town clerk that this has been done.
That item has been moved, seconded by Mr. Norton. Discussion.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr.
I'd like to
Goldrick.
offer an amendment.
You have a motion to amend?
Yes, I do. I would like to amend the rate from 10.969 to 10.798. That implies a use of fund balance of $15 million and a percentage increase in the mill rate of 1.15% as calculated by our budget director and controller.
I have a motion to amend,
Second.
seconded by Mr. Huffman. Discussion on the motion to amend. Mr. Goldrick?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, when we get to the end of next month, the end of this fiscal year, according to the estimates from our finance department, we will have over $44 million in cash in the general fund balance. That, I will remind everyone, our policy for general fund balance is equivalent to a range of between 5 and 10% of the operating budget. Now that, with the budget as it is currently set, is a little under $20 million at the 5% range, lower end of the range, and just under $40 million at the upper range. Now, we have been adding to the fund balance millions of dollars for the past 5 years. Now, let me just go to one point here. That use of fund balance in the CAFR for the coming year is not something, the rating agencies look at that and subtract that from the figure. But in real terms, we continue to add millions of dollars a year to the general fund balance. I will point out that we have an estimated $34 million in prepayments of property taxes before the end of the fiscal year. And this general fund balance has been going up despite a major recession, despite a major storm, despite remediation, and sitting on $25 million in excess of the minimum amount, earning just a few basis points in interest and declining in real terms is a very poor use of taxpayer funds. Now, if we were in a position where we had an experience where we know that there is a certain amount of heavy expenditures coming, then it would make sense. And yet we are running a structural surplus. Mr. Mynarski was actually frequently comes up with this calculation on fund balance. And if you would like to look at that, I would direct your attention to sources. And down there, the bottom two items, you've got favorable spending, $8 million, favorable revenues, $1 million, capital closeouts, $1 million. Now, that's not unusual for us. We're doing that on an annual basis. So with the use of fund balance that's currently being proposed of $9.75 million, we are still going to come up with several millions of dollars in net additions to the general fund balance. Will probably be over $50 million by end of June next year, even with the use of fund balance. Now, do we need this? If you look at our debt position, we're looking at roughly $200 million in debt, which is roughly 1/3 of the average for AAA municipalities in Connecticut, and less than 1/5 of the average for AAA municipalities nationwide. So it's not as if this is something that we have a high debt expenditure, high debt levels that we have to make a reserve against. And if we are in need of funds at some point in the future for whatever purpose, it is far better to borrow at a few basis points, repaying the funds in declining real terms, rather than take the money from taxpayers and have it decline in real terms in idle cash balances being used for nothing and being necessary for nothing. So I think we have to change the way we do budgeting in this town. There are 3 major areas in which we are very inefficient. This is one of them. Another one is our debt policy. 10% of this budget is going to be the capital tax levy, 10%. And given the building that we're doing, that makes no sense. We should be paying a fraction of that for the building that we're doing. And the other one, obviously, is the chronic underperformance in the pension fund. But this is before us tonight. And no matter how you cut it, no matter how many things you can think of that might be of use in the coming year or 2 years or 3 years, we are still going to be adding to this fund balance, still going to be adding to idle cash. And, we just took how long on 3 items of a few $1,000s each. This is millions of dollars, and we're not blinking an eyelash at this. So $5 million or $15 million use of fund balance gets us down to still, even if you use the calculation where we subtracted on day one of the fiscal year, is still over 8%, well above the minimum. And I might point out that for the credit rating agencies, virtually every metric in the town of Greenwich is far better than any other AAA municipality in the state. Using an additional $5 million to reduce the tax increase won't even come close to causing any interest whatsoever on behalf of the credit rating agencies. It's time that we started doing this differently. It's time that when we look at idle cash balances, we have a very good reason for keeping tens of millions of dollars in excess of our projected needs, rather than doing it because maybe sometime, somewhere, we might have a use for it. Our experience over several years in difficult times shows that we're adding millions every year. Thank you.
Further discussion on the motion, Mr. Hoffman?
Yes, thank you. Just to reiterate a couple of the points that have been brought forward in this process, we are taxing people to set aside funds that we really don't need to have on hand, and we essentially, through inflation, are losing the value of that money by sitting on it. This is unfair to the taxpayers. It's one of the things that we do that are not in anyone's best interest. If we were in a very uncertain time with regard to our finances, then having some cushion available in cash makes sense. We, however, are sitting on funds that are in banks that are paying us less than 5 basis points for having our money. And we have no serious purpose for which those funds are being held. They're beyond any requirement for any AAA measure. They're beyond any necessity that we can see in front of us. And furthermore, we have alternatives available should a reduction in the amount that we actually have available arise, and those would make it very easy for us to meet any unexpected capital or expenditure constraints. And those include that we have funds on hand that we haven't really included or treated as reserves. And in addition to that, if we ever faced a critical need that we have not faced in years and years, we could do what much of the sophisticated municipalities in this country do, and that is you would enter into a borrowing for tax anticipation or revenue anticipation. You'd have the funds on hand, and you would not have any financial crisis. So this is, to my mind, prudent and sensible financial administration. I second and endorse the notion that we move an additional amount so that what goes into this next year's budget is $15 million, thereby allowing us to reduce the burden of increased taxes on our taxpayers. Thank you.
Further discussion? Mr. Blankley?
Mr. Chairman, I endorse entirely the comments made by my two colleagues on this matter. In the hard corporate world I come from, among other things, as far as professional financial management is concerned, that there are two things which I would like to bring to bear. One was nixed last year. That was the issue of financing capital projects over the long term. And the other is this matter of cash on the balance sheet. In my corporate world, cash on the balance sheet of this nature would not be tolerated. The shareholders would get very antsy. It's given back to the shareholders in dividends or by share repurchase. If we're going to manage this business of the town of Greenwich properly, then I say that some portion of this excess cash balance should be handed back to our shareholders. In this case, we call them taxpayers. So I endorse the motion before us.
Further discussion? Mr. Johnson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate Mr. Goldrick's interest in a low tax rate increase of under 2%. We'll have to keep that in mind when we start looking at budget guidelines for the next fiscal year. We have concluded over 5 months of budget work with RTM approval of the budget and the mill rate increase of 2.75%. RTM approved that budget 176 to 9 to 5. Pretty solid support for the hard work of the Finance Department, BET Budget Committee, as well as the full BET, and more importantly, the RTM committees and districts who thoroughly reviewed our budget submissions. Now, while our general fund balance is projected to keep growing, the Finance Department's latest estimates show that, in the handout we have, that the fund balance of $35 million will be about 8.9%, and that's within our debt policy of between 5 and 10%. Why is it important to maintain a healthy general fund balance? You know, as we've said before in our budget deliberations, we have 4 major capital projects underway between MESA, finishing up Nathaniel Witherall, Central Fire Station is just starting, just broken ground, and the soil remediation, what's going to happen this coming fiscal year as well as down the road. The first 2 have requested additional funds due to cost overruns. What might be coming down the pike again? Does anyone doubt more requests will be made? I doubt it. The soil, you know, we budgeted for this coming fiscal year, but had to change that because of Connecticut DEP indecisions. We know that's going to be a liability down the road. Not sure how much that'll totally be. Storms on the horizon. What do we know is coming down? We don't know. This past year, we saw snow, the snow budget, which usually was projected on 30 inches of snow. We had 58 inches and have had several interim appropriations that we've had to approve. We don't know how many other Hurricane Sandys or Irenes may be coming down the road. Net takeaway is we need a healthy fund balance for unknown costs that may come forward. It's only prudent to do that. Looking at 2016 fiscal year, the health care contract expires the end of this year, 2014. We have budgeted for increases, but who knows what's going to be going on in the health industry. Pension, OPEB, the ARC increases are there. We've budgeted for some of those, but again, who knows what the actual performances will be of those funds. Capital tax levy. We increased that this year based on our needs, our requirements. I mean, as most people know, certainly this committee, capital tax levy is important. That funds the annual amounts needed for debt service and non-bonded projects. We need to keep raising that. We're going to have to look at probably raising that by at least another $4 million to stay within our debt policy ratios and guidelines. Nathaniel Witherall, we were lucky to get some tax credits from them, but who knows what their operating performance is going to be over the next couple of years. We may have to put some more money into that. There's some major capital projects that have come down kind of out of nowhere, and the example probably will be over the next year or two, a new school for New Lebanon. Who would have thought 6 months ago that their preliminary findings would have said $30 to $35 million for a new school? That's an example of some unknowns that we're going to have to probably finance. The debt level right now is about $175 million, projected to be $194 million by the end of the next fiscal year. Maybe the best use of our excess general fund balance would be to reduce that debt load. I strongly favor the tax rate increase of 2.75%. The RTM has endorsed that, again, by a very large, significant amount. I think we're on the right track and be prudent for us to stay at that level of 2.75% increase.
Mr. Chairman?
Okay, hang on, let me write this down. Mr. Raymer, Mr. Norton, Ms. Weisler. Let me write that down so I don't forget that.
And Ms. Tarkington, perhaps, too.
I'll add that in.
I am sympathetic to the arguments raised by my colleagues, all of them, both on the one hand, Mr. Goldrick, Mr. Hoffman, and Mr. Blankley. I'm also very much open and in agreement with the remarks of Mr. Johnson of the uncertainties that we face. With the assistance of Mr. Geiger and the assistance of Mr. Mynarski, I did some math of my own. I happen to favor the idea of the application of some additional funds and reduction of the mill rate just in a slightly more moderate figure than the $15 million or 5 point something or other higher figure of application of funds than the present 9.735 that's being proposed to reach the 2.75% increase. And it's my understanding that another one of my colleagues will be making a motion to that effect should the motion of Mr. Goldrick fail. And so I'm going to save my arithmetic for that, but I wanted to comment in response to this that I will vote against Mr. Goldrick's motion just because I think that the figure is slightly excessive. I will be voting in favor of a more moderate motion should that motion be made. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Norton, followed by Ms. Weisler and Ms. Tarkington.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I think that the proposal to increase the amount of money used from our cash balance or fund balance actually amounts to economic folly. And I'll give you 4 reasons why I believe that. First off, it compromises a planning process, which begins shortly after this budget is completed, and it commences in the fall and concludes with this meeting in which we recommend the budget. I think it's very important that we maintain a planning process both for our budget and for our mill rate. And as soon as you begin compromising that process, you, in effect, destroy its efficacy. The town of Greenwich is facing extensive deferred contingent liabilities, many of which we haven't yet quantified, and many of which will probably be substantial. I think that to continue to grow the fund balance is very prudent within the context of the fact that we will have extensive monies that have to be spent on contingent and deferred liabilities. The indication that the fund balance is going to increase is based upon a projection, and how valid and how much confidence can we have in projections. And the 4th point I will make is that the fund balance policy that we have, the current and expected fund balance at the end of this fiscal year is within the range that we have established. And I do not believe that it makes any economic sense to change the amount of fund balance or use a larger amount of fund balance to reduce the municipal tax rate.
Thank you, Mr. Norton. Ms. Weisler?
I wanted to express the fact that I'm not supportive of this amendment. At a 2.75% mill rate increase, the fund balance, as you can see, is projected at 8.9%. A year ago, the fund balance was at 8.9%. The year before, it was at 8.1%. That is consistent, as we all know, with the rating agency's target of 5 to 10% for a AAA rating. However, I think we can pride ourselves, and I think we should take pride, and we have, in fact, a modest debt balance, and that's certainly been supported by the RTM and the voters. However, we also know we have substantial unfunded pension and OPEB liabilities, which if you were to add those to the debt balance, we would more than double that balance. And from my corporate experience, it's always been to look at and focus on sort of what are the possible downside scenarios and to plan for them. And, we do have 4 major projects underway, as Mr. Johnson mentioned. There is, unfortunately, a potential risk for cost overruns. And looking down the road over the next several years, we have some significant projects already in the queue, as well as the prospect of some which have not been identified. So all of those reasons, I will not support this amendment.
Ms. Tarkington, followed by Ms. Kiernan.
Yes. When decision night, we ended up with a mill rate increase sort of by default of 2.75. I think that evening our decision sort of ended up somewhere between 2.70 and 2.71. I would have preferred that we stay at that level, but I think in terms of what has been circulated and analyzed and so forth by the RTM, it has been the 2.75% increase number. But I'd like to comment further on what Mr. Blankley said, because, really from a couple different standpoints. When we first started talking about fund balances and debt policies, it was really only fund balance that was critical. Debt policy sort of just followed that discussion. And, the rating agencies were basically telling Mr. Minarski, and he put it into presentation, which I believe was under Mr. Walco's administration, basically advising Mr. Minarski if he wanted to retain the town's AAA rating, we needed a fund balance policy. So that's really where we started out on all of these kind of issues. Also, last summer we had highly knowledgeable markets person brought to one of our debt policy meetings, I believe a colleague or someone that Ms. Kiernan knew, and he, in those discussions, pointed out that the rating agencies were really looking for a fund balance of 10 to 15%. I think that also associated with a much higher leverage. And so we've heard about the higher leverage from some of our colleagues, but they never finished the sentence with what was needed to balance it out. Finally, coming to what Mr. Blankley said, I think in corporations, we certainly do talk about the number of days of cash on hand. So if you look at the fund balance that's being presented, it's equivalent of about 32 days of cash, which really in today's environment is not too conservative a number. Generally, I think the rating agencies are looking for something higher than that. So I think, if we start, I like the idea of bringing in the private sector and making comparisons. But I also think we need to make sure that when we do that we're using the same relative ratios to, continue that discussion. Again, going back to last summer, when you think about what our gentleman from, I believe it was Goldman Sachs, said, he was really talking about a fund balance of 36 to 55 days. Another thing that I'd like to point out is that we do our fund balance calculations on the general fund and, exclusive of some of our other funds, which include Nathaniel Witherall, the sewer funds, the parking fund, and the school lunch fund. So there are some other things here to at least think about and discuss at some future time as we begin to talk about next year's budget guidelines.
Ms. Kiernan?
So I want to thank Mr. Goldrick and Mr. Huffman for raising really what is a very important issue. The trend is certainly up in our fund balance. This gives us an opportunity to be very clear with the public what our thoughts are and what our strategies are with respect to fund balance. It's extremely important. I'll just raise three issues, some of which have been touched on already. And the first is really what is the most prudent in terms of fiscal management for us to be doing with our fund balance. And you heard Mr. Johnson and others, and Mr. Raymer brought us up to date in caucus on a number of items. I would add to what you have heard that, of course, the Board of Education's investment in digital learning, which has been on the capital side for several years, is going to come over onto the operating side in the coming fiscal year. That's $3.3 million right there. So in my view, prudent fiscal management would dictate not bringing down the fund balance as far as Mr. Goldrick is suggesting. The second point I would like to raise is volatility. I think prudent budgeting on our part seeks to keep our spending and our mill rate increases less volatile. That would be optimal for taxpayers. And I think the volatility that's being suggested here, we have to think what will happen the next year after that and what that does to taxpayers and their budgets. Third is the question of what is the right use of these funds, and you've heard several suggestions, pension liability being one, and as Mrs. Tarkington suggested, an expert told us that that would be an excellent use of some excess fund balance we may have on hand. I would also caution, I heard, I'm not sure who, a suggestion of paying down debt. If we have very cheap debt, which we do, and we're in an environment where interest rates are going up, I think I would caution against paying off debt. We need to be very careful about that equation as we move forward and interest rates rise. So I would not be in favor of as steep a cut as is being suggested here this evening, but perhaps some more moderate cut might be appropriate, certainly following the budget discussions where Mr. Huffman raised the issue of our risk fund perhaps being overfunded, and of course our controller did agree with that suggestion at the time. So those are my thoughts. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Finger?
Mr. Chairman, in the event that Mr. Goldrick's motion does not pass, I plan on making another motion that would also reduce the mill rate, but not to the same extent as Mr. Goldrick. And I don't want to repeat all the things that my colleagues have said before me, but again, I think there's a balance between maintaining high reserves, a high fund balance, and trying to prudently plan for the future, and also not unduly burden our taxpayers in certain areas where I don't think, and maybe some of the others on this board don't think they need to be burdened. And at the same time, to accomplish that, I believe we can do that in many ways. One way we're talking about tonight is the use of fund balance, but there's that way, that opportunity with use of fund balance, and there's opportunities in other areas to try to keep the mill rate at a reasonable number, but also in a way that lessens the burden, but still allows this town to go forward and provide the level of service that is expected of most of our residents. So I just noticing you that I will be making another motion if this motion should fail.
Thank you. Anybody who hasn't spoken yet? Mr. Goldrick?
Mr. Chairman, when I listen to the comments on this, the story of the Emperor's New Clothes come to mind, that we all seem to believe, or the majority of this board seems to believe, that we're being prudent and careful, and we have to look out for the future, and this is the way to do it. In fact, that's not what we're doing. We are taking tens of millions of dollars from taxpayers' pockets and putting it in idle cash where it's depreciating in real value. Now, Mr. Johnson mentioned the debt policy. Let me remind him that our policy on debt, which would have included long-term financing, would have dramatically reduced the capital tax levy that taxpayers would have to pay. by going to 10 or 20 years instead of paying off major projects in 5, especially with interest rates that are virtually zero in real terms, we would sharply reduce the price, the cost to taxpayers. And we can still do that. There's still time to change that. But to have 10% of the budget going in a capital tax levy is silly to me. In terms of the planning process that Mr. Norton mentioned, our budgeting process is already broken. We are pretending that we are looking at 2% increase or 1.5% increase and so on, and yet each year we are piling up structural surpluses between like 3 and 4% of the budget. And we get to June 30th each year, and it's Christmas in June. All of a sudden, we have another $10 million that comes in, and we say it's a gift, and we stick it into the general fund balance, and then go back to budgeting based on the over-budgeted amounts for the previous year. We've got to stop doing that. And again, we mentioned, I think it was Mr. Johnson who mentioned the snow that we had. That was $1 million over and above what we had budgeted for the year. We had damages from storms and so on, and still we're up to $44 million in idle cash, still after all of that. So let me just make clear that this is a very modest increase in general fund balance use. I will bet you that even with that, the general fund balance will be significantly higher this time next year than it is today. It's not cutting into it. So remember that structural surplus, and don't look at the $35 million because the town of Greenwich doesn't end. Time does not end on July 1st. We are continuing to add millions of dollars throughout the year. So we need to be very prudent, very careful when we take tens of millions of dollars and stick it into idle cash. What exactly are we anticipating to happen? We have a multi-year experience in terms of interim appropriations, in terms of natural disasters, in terms of remediation. We've got the experience over years there, and still we are adding to it. So we do, as Mr. Johnson mentioned, need to change that debt policy because we are taking too much and delivering too little to the taxpayers here.
Peter, I just have a quick question before we go further. I've got 3 pieces of paper in front of me. One shows 8.87%, one shows 8.92%, and the other shows 8.87%. What is your projected number of fund balance, unrestricted, as of July 1? Because I've got 35.2, I've got 35.1, I'm hearing 44 over there. Hang on one second. I just have I want the answer from the controller.
Okay. For the benefit of the controller,
This is
the sheet that I have passed that the chairman is looking at is the sheet that Roland produced this afternoon and which I showed to you.
Are these 2 of them?
Yes.
Okay,
And
which
they were
one?
emailed out by Mr. Minarski this afternoon.
Okay.
There's 2 different ones.
There's 2 different ones, though, I have. That's the reason I'm asking this.
I'm sorry, I don't know about
One's 8.92%, one's 8.87%.
Showing the fund balances.
I haven't seen the one about 8.92.
It's not that big a difference,
one
but
was passed
I'm hearing 40 million, 44 million, and I want to be able to find that somewhere.
The 887 is the,
887 is the correct one, so I'm just going to,
and this
okay,
this ties to it.
okay, so,
I don't know where the third document came from. If I could, just a couple comments?
at this time,
Okay.
yes, I would ask that, Peter. I hate to put you on the spot, but I think I want to make sure we're, the accuracy of the numbers and your paper that you have here, this is your document?
Legal sheet, yes.
Okay.
The one with the 887 was prepared by Roland and shared with Mr. Minarski. The one that's the legal size sheet of paper that makes a comparison of various years.
Yep.
That's a piece of paper that was prepared by Mr. Minarski. And both of those pieces of paper were emailed to you this afternoon by Mr. Minarski.
Okay. So if I could very quickly, can you just run through, I hate to do this, but can you give us your perception of this? I don't see $44 million fund balance here, but can you give me your perception of your thoughts on this going forward? Because you put some footnotes here, I think, that are important.
44.3 is on both documents, okay? It's what Roland has projected the three funds to end up with at June 30th,
Okay?
okay?
That's before anything is used to reduce.
Correct, June 30th.
Reduced mill rate.
June 30th.
Right, so once that's used for fund balance, it's not 40, it's
That's correct.
gone, it's spent.
That's why you see both figures.
Gotcha, okay, fair enough. So this legal piece of paper, can you just kind of run through your thoughts on this?
A couple comments is, we're unique. When we did, at the recommendation of IBIC, the financial consultant and myself, when we were struggling with negative fund balances under the modified pay-as-you-go, one of the things we tried to demonstrate to them that we had other sources. And we put the risk fund out there, and we put the capital non-recurring. And we told them that other towns appropriate from the general fund for legal settlements and for supplemental appropriations like Hamilton Avenue School. So we're unique in that when we did the fund balance policy, we combined them. That's when we were weaker. Almost all the other towns only use general fund balance, the column on the left, when they set their policies of 5 to 10%. So we're using not only general fund, but when we need to settle a legal claim or we need to supplement a school, et cetera, we've got these other areas we could reach out to. The national average is over 30% for fund balance, the national average. Mr. Carey, in June of last year, recommended, he said our fund balance was too low, and he recommended a much higher number for a variety of reasons. One of the things is I partially agree with everything that's been said here, and even what Sean has said, and Randy has said about we're not getting much with the money in the bank. We're restricted by state statute on what we can invest in the general funds. I can't invest in commercial paper. I can't go into any stock market, private equity, et cetera, et cetera. We're restricted by state statute. What we've done here, now you've got the number at $44 million at June 30th. We use fund balance to the tune of next year of $9,700,000, okay? We've increased that use of fund balance by $1,669,000. We've increased the conveyance tax revenue by $500,000. We've increased the building permit revenue by $250,000. That's $2.4 million that we've increased next year. Now, when you look at this and you see the $44 million when it went from 33 to 44, a lot of it's one-time revenues. I said before in the controller's report that you got $6 million from the Superstorm Sandy and the FEMA reimbursements. You've got this found money for Nathaniel Witherall of $4.449 million to balance the budget this year, where you didn't have to subsidize Nathaniel Witherall by 2.5. So the leap from 33 to 44 can explain where we've got these newfound revenues. Places like the state of Connecticut gets in trouble where they balance their budget on accounting gimmicks, one-time revenues, borrowing, et cetera, et cetera. So I could say that we've got to watch it. I think 15 million is a reach, okay? It's a little bit too high for use of fund balance. Yes, it keeps us within the target, and yes, we're not making money on this 44 million. 44 is a fund balance number. It's not a cash number. At June 30th, we forecast, if you looked at the cash forecast, 95 million cash. And we have, I think at our high point, $250 million cash in the bank between the various funds, some of them that Leslie alluded to. I don't know what I can say about as far as the money not making anything. No one's making money in the general fund throughout the state of Connecticut. What we've done is we've brought to the Investment Advisory Committee in a month or two ago where we're going to try to extend our maturities to make more money on it, and we're still going out there with a CD program to try to make a little bit more money. It's nothing. It's peanuts as far as making money on $95 million. But I don't support use of fund balance for $15 million. I do support what the But the BET approved at 2.75 with the increase in the use of fund balance and the increase of revenues, because you're chipping away at it. You're not letting it get away where it's going to 11 or 12, in spite of the fact that the average, national average is 30% of fund balance. And the expert that was brought in recommends a much higher number of 10 to 15%. So that is some of the points I just wanted to put out there. And as far as some of the comments that Mr. Johnson, Mark Johnson made, is we still have budgetary challenges. We've got over $10 million that are listed on here as far as budgetary challenges regarding health care. We don't know where it's going in the future. We've leveled out with the pension arc. We can now have a new OPEB arc that's kicking in that we might have to fund, not to the same tune as the pension arc. We don't know what's out there as far as soil remediation, if there's anything else the next time we open up the ground on the next project. And we don't know where we're going with Nathaniel Witherall. We're going to have to find $2.5 million more probably next year for the budget. So overall, I think a lot of good comments. We're lucky to be in this position where we've got this increase in fund balance. We've made the credit rating agencies a lot happier than when we were walking in there with a negative $43 million. That's just basically my comments on this overall conversation.
Thank you, that helped.
Mr. Chairman, if I can ask Mr. Monarski a couple of questions.
Please.
Peter, it's my understanding that you mentioned 30% fund balance for the nation. For AAA municipalities in Connecticut, my understanding is about 12% fund balance to operating budget. Is that correct, roughly?
I'm not sure. I could find that out for you, and that would be 12% of the general fund, not the three funds.
12%.
The other towns
compared with operating budget.
No, that would be compared with this number.
The number on the left.
And isn't it also correct that the average debt burden, the debt divided by the grand list, is about 3 or 4 times higher in those AAA municipalities than it is in Greenwich? So they're keeping somewhat higher balances against a substantially higher debt levels. Isn't that correct?
Okay.
Yeah.
And what I've done in the past for the audit committee in 2 different occasions, in 2011 and in 2013 last summer, I gave everyone the metrics as far as the AAAs in the state of Connecticut and where we are. You're correct. I just don't know the exact number, but you're correct.
Actually, I'm like a lawyer. I asked the question that I know the answer to. I think that's from your material that you put out. And I think if Mr. Huffman can help us on this, the Goldman Sachs guy was really more referring to a type of municipal financing which wasn't a town like ours, but a different sort of project, correct?
Yes, my understanding, and based on the discussions that I've had in other situations, he was looking at issuers such as, for example, the situations he was involved with revenue-based financing programs, where you may have greater uncertainty as to the sureness of the revenues that you may be receiving, the funds that may be available, and in those instances was suggesting a 10 to 15% balance was a prudent and reasonable amount. In fact, as we have seen, 5 to 10% is what the rating agencies have been looking for in these situations, and we are well into that, even if we do the proposal that we have made here.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, one more. Here, we borrowed, the rate that we got on the bands was what, 12 basis?
13 basis points.
13 basis points. And that was gobbled up in no time, correct? A couple of minutes, right? When we issued this, it went quickly. There was demand for our bands. They were bought quickly. They were bought quickly.
Well, it's done competitively over the internet, and it's a cutoff at 11 o'clock. people are bidding minutes and seconds before 11 o'clock. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, my point is that if we were to see a shortfall coming, if for some reason we had a project, whatever, that we got down, I don't know. I cannot understand how we could possibly use $50 million for whatever would go wrong. But in that case, given the fact that our metrics in terms of per household value of the house and so on and so forth is so high, we could borrow at virtually nothing in minutes. And that would be the prudent thing to do, repaying in depreciating dollars rather than sticking tens of millions in depreciating dollars from taxpayers. Would that be an argument that you think is worth considering?
I consider the fund balance an insurance policy. And I'll defer to Mr. Raymer and Mr. Tarkenton. Do you remember about a year ago where we were in danger of losing a legal case that it could have cost us more than $100 million? And we came pretty close? We don't know what's out. To Mr. Johnson's point, we don't know what's out there. This is an insurance policy. I don't totally disagree with what you're saying. I think $15 million is too much use of fund balance. We're using $9 million.
One more question, if I may, Mr. Chairman, one more. Part of this fund balance is the risk fund. Now, if I remember correctly, maybe you can correct me on this, that is supposed to be equivalent to the auditor's estimate of our potential legal liabilities outstanding. Now, this is meant to go to $3 million, and according to the outside auditors, that liability was, $300,000? Public information.
That's correct.
So and our payout experience, which is also public information, averaged for the past 7 or 8 years about $100,000 a year. So we are putting in something like $2.8 million in excess of what is our, $2.7 million in excess of our estimated legal liabilities, and almost $2.9 million in excess of our annual payout experience. Isn't that correct?
Regarding the risk fund, and I'll repeat, which I supported you on during the budget process, if you look at the risk fund on the bottom there, where we started out with $388,000, the BET policy informally was to get to the number that was in the CAFR. It was, for a number of years, estimated at $3 million. Two things happened in the last couple of years. About 3 years ago, it was estimated at over $4 million. We didn't fund it. And last year, it was estimated at 300-something thousand. I can't remember the exact number. We didn't fund it the other way. So we've walked away from our policy of trying to get to the $3 million figure that's listed in the CAFR. So that's a little bit outside the discussions we're having tonight, and I kind of agree with you. And I did suggest that we didn't need the $500,000, or I forgot what the number was, $599 in the budget. But it doesn't change my comments on the overall use of fund balance discussion.
Okay. With that said, I'm going to, on Mr. Raymer, this will be the last question or comment on this item.
I deferred doing some arithmetic a moment ago, but it just seems to me it just fits here if I can. So I passed out to each of you. You received it by email, but I just passed out to each of you another copy. I hope you've all received it. It was the workup that Roland did at my request this afternoon. It's the one that has a percentage in the bottom right-hand corner of 8.87%, if you're looking at that sheet. And I just want to pick out for you that this was a workup in which I had asked Roland to make his best guess at where he thinks the figures are going to end up in the current year. The $44 million figure, you see it 4 lines up on the far right-hand side. After you apply the 9.735 in reduction of mill rate that was being proposed to achieve the 2.75 increase and make the adjustment for the increase in tax levy, the net then is the $35 million figure, 35.1 that you're seeing there. I wanted to share with you the guesstimates that came from both Peter and Roland, that our present health care contract pegs the premium rate only for the first 6 months of the upcoming fiscal year. We have not yet contracted with a carrier or any carrier for the last 6 months. It was Roland's reasoned best guess that the increase of cost to us for those second 6 months would be at approximately $2 million. It was also mentioned to you that the required ARC, which is going to be visited on us for the first time in OPEB, will cost you $1.5 million. The increase in the capital levy that results from the projects that are already in the hopper is going to cost you $4 million in capital levy. And reasonable guess that we are no longer getting the benefit of tax credits. You'll probably be writing a check for a subsidy to Nathaniel Witherell of $2.5 million. Those four numbers together total $10 million.
Plus digital learning.
If you would then add the worry list that Mr. Johnson had so well articulated, supplemented slightly by Mrs. Kiernan, the worry list included such things which I have not put into the $10 million of what if there's further complications with MISA, what about Central Firehouse, what about Project Renew, what about moving digital learning out of capital into operating, gee, are we going to be acquiring a property for a Northwest Firehouse? Gee, what happens if it snows again next winter like it did last winter? What happens if there's a Sandy or an Irene? What happens if we have this unnamed lawsuit similar to the one that we experienced that Peter just alluded to? Gee, do you want to talk again about fire department staffing? What other terrible things can happen to us? You could be looking at other numbers. Surely one thing you're going to be looking at is I believe that the Red Cross is going to be making its changes in the transportation arrangements, and TAG will be coming back to you about the $77,500 that we didn't fund on the first round. So there are things out there. I don't think the concerns articulated by Mr. Johnson and by Ms. Kiernan are wrong, but a starting place is the $10 million that were the hard numbers that were prognosticated by your own finance department. So if we have a fund balance of $35 million after we've already applied 9.735 in reduction of mill rate, if we have a fund balance policy and we want to fund it at only the minimum promised 5%, that's another $19,784,424, or in other words, about $20 million. If we then make allowance for the $10 million that I just prognosticated to you with the benefit of our finance department, at that point you're down to $2 million and change that are available to you to play with a little further. Maybe taking the conservatism of Peter might call for you to make some further reduction in the mill rate, but certainly not more than the 2 and small fraction that's available to you after the math that I just did. And so I think that's the math that I was looking at. That's what I'd be receptive to. And I think at this point we should take a vote on Mr. Goldrick's motion and then see if there's a follow-up motion to make an adjustment, but perhaps in a smaller amount.
On the Sean Goldrick motion to amend, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Show of hands. 1, 2, 3. 3 in favor. Opposed? I'm going to call that 3, 9. Abstaining? I'm going to call that 390. That motion has failed. Mr. Finger, I will call on you for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to make a motion to amend the motion that was on the table that I believe was Mr. Drake made.
I think you need to make a fresh motion. That motion just failed.
No, that was a motion to amend. That failed.
Yes.
Right, but all he was doing, the motion was just to change the grand list number.
Making another motion to amend the mill rate from the 10.969 to a mill rate of 10.397, which would represent a 2.5% mill rate increase, and that would be an additional $1 million from the fund balance, so that the total dollars being used from the fund balance would be the $9,735,000 that we currently have in the budget, and adding another $1 million so that the total would be $10,735,000. And in the interest, that's my motion.
Seconded by
Me.
Mr. Raymer. Discussion on the item, Mr. Finger.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, could I ask Mr. Finger to say that mill rate again?
10.397, which would be a 2.5% increase and a $1 million increase in the use of fund balance.
10.937, no?
10.397.
No.
10.937.
There you go.
10.7.
I just did the math.
Got it. Okay, sorry.
10.937.
You gave me the, transpose the numbers. So I apologize, 10.937, which represents a 2.45% increase over last year. 2.45%
increase over last year's mill rate without
So,
consideration.
Mr. Chairman, without adding too much time to the discussion, and not repeating many of the things that you've already heard from most everybody up here and then Mr. Minarski, I arrived at the $1 million this way. I felt that the addition of the $500,000 to the risk fund was not necessary for the reasons that have been enumerated, certainly by Mr. Minarski just a short while ago. The other $500,000 I arrived at by looking at the most recent projections for revenues from conveyance tax, building permits, and interest. While there will be a slight decrease in what we projected for interest income, the numbers look like we're going to be about $3.5 million for the good on the combination of conveyance tax revenue and building permit revenue. So taking just an extremely conservative $500,000 out of those additional revenues, combined with the $500,000 that we allocated for the risk fund, that's how I arrived at that $1 million. And again, I think it's important for this board not to just focus on, take a snapshot of where we are today and look at this budget, but we need to do our responsibility to the community, which is the prudent fiscal management and looking at a more, a longer-term analysis of where we are in this town. And I think that the $1 million is a conservative number, and I think it's something that we can easily absorb within this budget. I think it's an indication to the community that we recognize this growing fund balance, but that there are these many possible needs out there. You've heard many of them listed and enumerated. But I think that we can well afford to allocate $1 million more of fund balance so that the total fund balance dollars in this budget would be $10,975,000.
Is there any member that would like to add? I mean, we've heard the conversations.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Goldrick?
Yeah, I think my view is we should be making real and significant impacts on what we take from taxpayers, not sort of symbolic amounts, and I'm not sure we can actually even see this. But just on this argument, I would go back to what Mr. Raymer mentioned, and we talked about the $35 million as opposed to 44. We're missing the point here. We're mixing apples with oranges. At the end of this fiscal year, using the $8.05 million use of fund balance, after shelling out another $1 million for snow removal and so on, still we are several millions of dollars ahead. Each year we use fund balance. We have a number slotted in there, and still over 5 years we put in something like $44 million. And you mark my words, if we adopt your figure of the $9.75 million, this time next year, we're going to be over $50 million. So we need to understand it's got to be like with like when we do this.
Thank you. So I failed to make a comment so far tonight, but now I'm going to. So I've heard comments tonight like pretending. I don't think I'm pretending. I don't think I've been pretending for 21 years working for the town. I think I hear about the budget process being broken. Yep, the 9 members of the RTM who didn't vote for that budget. I'm hearing short-sighted conversations tonight. I heard about corporations not having this kind of cash, give it back to the dividends. Is it Apple Corporation's got $1 billion or $100 billion on the books on their cash right now? I hear about peer communities. I hear about fund balance. I think Mary Lee Kiernan and Bill Finger, I think you said it perfectly tonight. The people listening to this certainly can see a difference of opinion. We talk about a time back in 2008 when the market crashed and the revenues in the town went to zero. The conveyance went to zero, building permits went to zero, and the interest rates fell. And there's a gentleman sitting in the back of the room that laid off 75 people because if he didn't do that year, the town would have had a negative cash position at the end of the fiscal year, and that would have created the need for this board to immediately tax that levy to have a balanced budget, because that's part of our town charter. We were coming out of the pay-as-you-go at that time. We had no fund balance. So we talk about the budget process. We started off tonight, and you'll hear some comments in my chairman's report. And I think going back to some of the conversations about the budget, we sent a package from the Budget Committee to the BET. We sent that to the RTM. The RTM was sent a letter from the Budget Committee, sent a letter from me, and it told them that under our projections, we're doing pretty well. We're taking care of this. We're not taking care of that. We're doing this. We're not doing that. And you should anticipate, if you approve this budget, you'll see a mill rate increase of about 2.75%. So my question to everybody is, if the grand list wasn't growing at 0.48% this year, and it was growing at 1.1%, what would you do then? What would your position be then? The question is, the town has grown accustomed to, and I believe enjoys, stability. The cash that we're talking about allows us to have that stability. So if we look at budget to budget, and I think I would put my name in the hat against anybody in this town knowing this budget. Matter of fact, it's a flat-out challenge. Okay? But when I look at this and I say next year we have 10.10 million plus digital learning goes up, the unspent money from this year, okay, eats all of that up. So we're really not growing. And we talk about our fund balance. Last year we actually, according to this document, we dropped 2.5% in our unrestricted fund balance. But this is not about what the fund balance is or the debt policy. The mere fact that I'm sitting here with people who say give back the cash now and then borrow it when we need it, please, Town of Greenwich, hear those words. That will not happen. I will not vote. I will vote to send the RTM what we agreed to send the RTM. That's what I will support. Now, let me give you the other side of it. Bill Finger, you're 100% correct. If we do have extra cash, we have opportunity, and I think we should use extra fund balance. This is where I'm siding with you. But we do it in the process that we've done it all these years. Next year, we add something to the reduce from the tax levy and use the fund balance then in the budget process. We decide when we go out for borrowings, I believe in January, if we're going to borrow 35 and you want to borrow 38 instead or 36 instead, that's fine. I would have no problem with that. But that's part of a process. That's not arbitrary right now. That's not short-sighted. That's meaning we have it now, so give me my money now, and then later on, when we run into another economic meltdown, those people can borrow the money. They can pay it back with interest. This is the most decisive conversation that I have seen right now. This is it. When somebody says we have no need for the cash, okay, and we should give that back in the tax levy, that's just short-sighted, because let's do the basis. If you take I'm going to use Mr. Goldrick's number or I'll use Bill's number. Whatever you take out of your basis, which you increase from. So this year we dropped the mill rate to 2.5 or 1.1, I think was the other number. And next year, if we need to rebuild that, you've got to replenish that. You've got to start from there and work up. Okay? This, to me, tonight's conversation, okay, was not about lowering the mill rate. I'll make no bones about it. When I get called by the media that one of the members is projecting to do this, and I say to myself, wow, I haven't heard that before, and I go to a few BET meetings. You might see me there once in a while. Okay? That's what this is about. And tonight, I will not vote for anything but the 2.75 that we told the RTM, that we had an agreement with the RTM. This is historic, this conversation. Boy, do I wish Nancy Barton was sitting at this table. And it was Mr. Raymer, I'll quote you from 2 budgets ago. I think we ought to raise the mill rate extra. It's better to have the cash on hand. Was that true, Mr. Raymer? And you know I love you dearly, but that was a conversation.
Do I get a chance to respond?
You will. I will give you a response. But when Nancy Barton sat here year after year and say, raise the mill rate to 4%, we're going to need the cash. We have a lot of capital projects to do. And everybody at that time said, well, we don't want to do 4%. We would like that. I think at the time we were always talking in the 3 to 3.5%. But those were the conversations. So that's my position where I will be. Mr. Raymer.
I just enjoy this moment for the flip-flop between the political alliances where the Democrats are pushing for less taxes and the Republicans are dragging their heels. This is a choice moment for me, for which I take great glee. I do believe, just to respond to the point that you raised, I do believe also in something in the nature of mill rate smoothing. When one has bumpy financial burdens to carry, sometimes it's fairer to your taxpayers to maintain a steady and predictable rate of the taxes, which means in some years you're taxing a little more to afford the possibility to use those funds to defer the cost. You don't have to tax quite so much in the subsequent year. And when I raised this with you 2 years ago, it's because we had an opportunity to lower the tax burden greatly, but we were concerned with some of the burdens, capital burdens particularly, that were coming. And I proposed at that time that we not make a reduction, admitted that that would result in some additional fund balance, but I was looking forward to being able to use those funds to pay down some of the headaches that we had. And that's a hesitation that I have with the proposition that I've just seconded here, because I don't seriously think that if we passed a 2.45% increase this year, that I could, in straight face, say to the taxpayers, and you can look forward to 2.45% increases over each of the coming years. And one of the negatives of the motion that I've seconded is that you are, in a sense, slightly deceiving your taxpayers by giving them, if you were to pass this, a lower rate this year and lead to the false expectation that the increase would be similar the next year, whereas I think, in fact, the increase would be somewhat greater. Nevertheless, there was an appeal that I felt in the original pleas of Mr. Goldrick that we have perhaps more cash on hand. Can we give some relief to the taxpayers by allowing, at least in this year, a little further reduction of the taxes by applying some of the free cash that we have available? And that was the reason that I seconded the motion, the reason that I'll vote in favor of Mr. Finger's motion.
Further discussion? Otherwise, I'll call for the vote. I'm going to call it Mr. Finger's motion to amend. All those in favor, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 in favor. Opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That motion has failed. 5-7-0. Are there any other motions to amend? If not, that will bring us back to the original motion, and I'll highlight 10.969 mils on that motion. I'll call for the vote on that. All those in favor of the original motion, signify by saying aye. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 in favor. Opposed? 1, 2, 3. 9-3. That motion is carried. That brings us to the next motion for the sewer maintenance fund.
I'll quickly read it. Resolved that a tax at the rate of 0.611 mils on the dollar be, and the same hereby is, levied and laid upon the assessment list of the town of Greenwich last completed as the tax for the town's sewer maintenance fund for the succeeding fiscal year. I won't read the second resolution. It's the same as prior.
Same as the first. Seconded by Mr. Norton. Discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? That motion is carried 12-0-0.
And the final tax mill rate resolution resolved that a tax at the rate of 0.044 mils on the dollar be, and the same is hereby levied and laid upon the assessment list of the town of Greenwich last completed as the tax for the said town's sewer improvement fund for the succeeding fiscal year.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Norton. Discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That motion is carried, 12-0-0. Old business. I have nothing under old business. Item number 11.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Raymer.
Under old business, I had thought that it might be possible that we would get a status report from the committee that was appointed at last meeting regarding the policy and procedures as it applies to the posting on the website of audit reports.
I will entertain your motion to add an item under old business for the purposes of an update on the audit posting policy. I'm going to call it that for lack of better terms. I have a motion to add an item.
It's not a motion, Mr. Chairman, it's just an inquiry, respectful inquiry to the chair of that committee.
Okay, I will entertain a motion to add the item on there. Otherwise, I would consider that.
I'm sorry, very good. So moved.
Okay, are you with? Okay, so the motion's second. Discussion on the motion to add the item under old business as a report. I'll have a discussion on it. That item was approved. First of all, the item in question failed. Second of all, under the greatness of my heart, I sent that to a committee for review to see if we could find a streamlined process in order to do that. That committee has had conversations and hasn't met yet, and we will have till next month. That's as it's on the agenda. So you've got your report.
Thank you.
Okay, but if there's nothing else to do, I don't know what we would be voting on.
No,
I wasn't looking for, Mr. Chairman, I wasn't looking for a vote on the item. To speak very candidly with the chair, I would like the item not to get lost, and I was bringing
Are you
periodic
suggesting that it
attention
would?
No,
I would find that a personal attack.
Please don't be personally offended. I'm only trying to keep my own thought process orderly by raising this matter again from time to time.
Right. I thank you for your concern, and I assure you that you do not have to worry about getting lost. I'll tie a string into my finger if you think I need it.
I don't think you need it.
Thank you. Okay, approval of the regular BET minutes for April 21st.
so moved.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Raymer, seconded by Ms. Tarkington. Was everybody here for that? Yeah. Now, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining? That is passed 12-0-0. Mr. Drake, do you have anything?
No, sir.
Mr. Norton?
No.
I actually, tonight, have a fairly lengthy chairman's report. First of all, Mr. Finger, you don't look like a grandfather. Congratulations.
Oh, congratulations.
You're the youngest looking grandfather.
He sure is.
Bless. This weekend, everything okay?
This morning.
This morning?
Yep.
What are you doing here?
Little boy, little girl, what's her name?
Come on, fess up.
Beautiful little girl, Jacqueline Finger.
Wow, that's really good. Bless, good luck, good luck. Have you thought about some college investment? Oh, no, just figured I'd get to that. Okay.
Some fund balance?
Use of fund balance. Now, that one I'll agree. I think you have to use fund balance. So,
Well, if it's remitted directly rather than through the treasury, it's not a gift. It doesn't even hit the books.
there we go.
But then the RTM has to approve it.
Yeah,
See, there you go. Okay, well, I think I could speak for everyone that the last month, everybody here was a little bit busy. I truly want to go out and say, I know I asked everybody to go out a month early to the committee and districts, and I really think that does help in the budget process. And I thank everyone who sent in the reports. I'm really appreciative of that. It allowed us to sort of get to key people and get information. While on the budget, I'm going to ask the Budget Committee next month to see if we could put together sort of a debrief on the budget process. A general discussion. I don't know how Mr. Johnson wants to handle it, but I've done this when I was Budget Committee Chair, and I ask everybody, just send me some comments, some stuff you want to, but maybe you could put that sort of towards the end of your agenda, give everybody a chance. I think there were some calendar issues this year. There was a few things, but everybody should participate in that, by the way. Next month also begins our year-end closeout. I think it's the most important meeting that we have. Believe it or not, I've always felt this way. I think that's where we are tasked to check our capital status report. What did we begin? Where are we? What didn't we begin? Why didn't it begin? And I think we should get the department heads to be prepared to work through the capital appropriation statement and update the board. I think that's very important. I can speak for myself. When I was on the budget committee, maybe Mr. Finger can help, or Ms. Tarkington, we had some things like just come up, why didn't that get going? And we were able to, make some changes. Board of Education, Ms. O'Neill just left here, is doing something a little different on New Lebanon School. They're actually doing they did a pre-feasibility study, so I'm still trying to figure that one out. But now they're doing a feasibility study, and they're really looking at this before they put a package together. And I think somebody did say tonight that there's sort of guesstimate numbers out there of $35 million for that project. But Barbara asked me for, normally on a building committee we get one member, but asked me if we could have two people sort of work with Ben Branyan sort of through the process. And I'm going to get to something else for the audit committee in a minute or two. And I really thank Mr. Raymer and Mr. Drake for volunteering for that. Let's see, this week, I got away with that, Jeff? That was good. Okay, this week, Elaine, Mr. Drake will be meeting with Tom, our new IT director. I think it's Friday morning at 9 o'clock. First of all, it's probably an introduction for me and to say hello. But I think going forward, obviously, we look for IT to be able to find efficiencies, to change things. I will create, now that we have a new IT director, and I don't know how to do it, maybe Roland could sort of help me with that. But Mr. Blankley, if I could get you to take on that going forward, sort of our liaison to IT on behalf of the board?
By all means, Chairman, yes. I assume that was from the start
well,
of the
he's
year.
just come on board. This is a chance for us to meet him. We're having some issues with the minutes, and we want to get all that going, so I figured we'd have our first informal meeting there. And let's see. I've said this for about a year, and I finally got around to it. Concept to completion. Mr. Norton, I've given it to you. It is nothing more than something I think we've needed on our big capital projects, whether we're refurbishing, rebuilding, or replacing a building. And so I've given Mr. Norton this checklist for this capital project, and I'm going to ask the audit committee to go through it. I've had some, of course, I worked on it with Roland at the start, and Mr. Manelli's had some dabblings in it. And what I think it is just sort of a checklist on capital projects for us to attach to all the big ticket items going forward, so we sort of know where they are, what's next. I think that would be helpful for us going forward. Mm-hmm. Sort of takes us from the idea to getting this, what I call the key in the door. And, I think this is a very important, and I really need everybody's help with this on this. The dog run is a prime example here. I mean, this is, when I hear about the dog run, I mean, who's got to approve it? What is it? Is it a gift? The checklist would have answered that question.
Mr. Chairman, there actually are three different constructions of building committees.
Correct. And my feeling is...
There's not necessarily overlap.
Correct, but I think when you get into this checklist, you'll see I've sort of got it covered. Like I have building committee. Is it Nathaniel Witherell or is it Board of Ed? If it's not Nathaniel Witherell, Board of Ed, you don't have a building committee. You just skip that step. That's completed, and you just keep right on moving down. So that's sort of what I've got going on. And again, it's next month that we're meeting, and we're hoping to get all of our business done so we don't have an August meeting. And with that, I don't have anything else. Mr. Blankley?
Second.
All those in favor? Opposed? Abstaining? We are closed.